What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguised Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. That is One Pie Pizza. Find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're using to listen to this episode of Disguised Coverage. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2 underscores ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguised Coverage, we're going to be going through the roster needs for this Buffalo Bills team. We have a pretty decent chunk of free agency that has gone through already. We've got the NFL draft coming up in literally almost about a month, like a couple days from now, on the Thursday of this week, a full month from now, we will be live with the NFL draft, and we'll have you covered with that here on the Cover One Network. So we're about a month away from the NFL draft. We've got a decent chunk of free agency that has happened already these past several weeks, and there's more free agency to come. And we've started to see the moves that have happened across the league. We've started to see how the roster is starting to shape out for the Buffalo Bills, and it's within that vein. Oh, grab this. Pop says, "What jersey are you wearing?" It's opening day this week for Major League Baseball. I am wearing a Boston Red Sox Jason Varitek jersey with the Captain C. I'm a Red Sox fan. I don't like anything else from Boston, just in case anyone throws it out there. I'm not a Bruins guy. I'm obviously not a Patriots guy. I'm not a Celtics guy. Just want to put that out there because everybody likes to, jump down my throat anytime I say I'm a Red Sox guy. But I'm a big Boston Red Sox fan, and thus the jersey for this week. Good eye, Pops. I appreciate you. So with the amount of free agency moves that have transpired across the league and for the Bills, like I mentioned, we're starting to see this roster take shape. We've seen the moves that this team has made, and honestly, a lot of economical moves, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with what we anticipated for the offseason here for the Buffalo Bills. And again, we've started to see this roster take shape, but that doesn't mean this team is done. We've seen the rumors floating around with DeAndre Hopkins. We see that the Bills are still tied to Odell Beckham Jr. in a variety of ways. We keep hearing a little rumblings here and there in regards to the Bills and players that they're or teams that they are potentially tied to. So there's still a lot to happen from a free agency standpoint and obviously from a draft standpoint. But both of those things happen within the framework and the scope of this Buffalo Bills roster in terms of what it is, what it can be for 2023 and beyond. Oh, how dare you, Thomas? Why would you do this? Thomas comes in and says, "Let's go Yankees." I understand where you're coming from. Obviously, you're a Yankee fan, but, disappointed in you, Thomas. But nonetheless, show. Thomas says, "I've never seen a garbage bag buttons before." That's good. That's very good. Well played. Well played. That's very funny. That's very good. So in tonight's episode, we are going to talk about this roster and where they are as a team, what they need. Obviously, we're going to rank those positions of need because there are several. Some of them are more luxury or auxiliary pieces. Some of them are vital or key components to football in general, but especially this team. We're going to talk about why they are ranked the way they are, the potential solutions to them, where those solutions exist, what it means for 2023, but also I think 2024 and beyond. That's a focal point in several of the positions that I've got in my rankings tonight on this episode. I think we often get caught up in the moment or the immediacy of things, whether it's an individual play or drive or game or season. And I think sometimes the bigger picture in terms of the longevity and the viable sustainability of a team going forward can sometimes get lost, which is understandable. But I think when that gets lost in the shuffle, it tends to, you get blinders on for some of the potential moves, and it kind of limits you in terms of your thinking of what could happen in an offseason or potentially going forward. So with all that being said, that's what this episode is going to be tonight. We're going to rank the Buffalo Bills roster needs from first all the way through kind of like fourth-ish, fifth-ish is what I have. I kind of have things broken out. And what I also want to do, I'm going to put it in the chat right now. I want everybody who's joining me live here on the show. We usually get good participation here on the show, and hopefully we do again, knock on wood. For those of you riding with me here in the chat, I want to know your needs, your rankings, which positional grouping or position individually is your top priority and why. How would you like to potentially solve it? Anything and everything you have that's on your mind with regards to the Buffalo Bills roster and its needs, throw it up into the chat. I like to make this as engaging as possible. So anything you got, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, whatever have you, throw it up into the chat. As always, super chats get priority. One, because I respect the monetary donation. Two, because the color attracts my eyes and pulls me away from my notes. But I do like to try to bring up anything and everything that I possibly can. So feel free, throw that up in the chat. And as always, I mentioned it earlier in the beginning. If you are coming into this show, please, 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 and thank you, drop a like on this episode. I know I literally say this thing every week, and I know it's corny to say, and I know that it's corny to say that it's corny, but likes go a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. You guys and girls would be legitimately surprised to know how much something as simple as a like goes towards pushing shows forward in terms of the algorithm and helping it get out there for more reach. And that's what we're trying to do here on this brand and on this show is we try to take this and ride it as far as possible until the wheels fall off. So please, 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 and thank you, whether you're watching live now or watching later, please here on YouTube, drop a like on this video if you would be so kind. I want to grab some of the comments now that you folks are starting to throw into the chat because you guys are very active already, which I'm not surprised. And I also really appreciate, especially when I do the solo shows with no guest. It's really nice to see all the engagement, the live viewership, and then the chat and the engagement. It's kind of like I have another person on the show with me, even though I don't. And there's a multitude of you. So I appreciate all the comments coming through. And I'm interested to see the comments. I earlier today on Twitter, I posted kind of just like a generic question of like, what are your top three, most important positional needs for the Buffalo Bills? And it got more engagement than I thought it potentially would. And the answers were varied. I guess I shouldn't be surprised by that, but I expected it. Granted, there was a central theme and core to a lot of the answers, but there was a lot of variance in terms of what the top or most important need for this Buffalo Bills roster is amongst Bills Mafia. I saw votes for defensive end. I saw votes for right tackle, votes for defensive tackle, votes for middle linebacker, wide receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, tight end, tackle, a ton. Again, essential theme, usually into that spot of if we're kind of bulking it, defensive line, linebacker, tackle, and wide receiver. But I thought there would be more universal agreement in terms of what the top need was. And if I had to lean a certain way, I would say most of the votes skewed towards linebacker. But it's always interesting to see everybody's perspective in terms of what the biggest need is, because it all depends on what your need is or how you define what need is. And for me, in this episode, as I start to go into the chat here, I'm going to say it now and then I'll say it later. For me, in this episode, I defined need as the combination of the floor and ceiling of a player or players currently occupying that role or position in 2023 and beyond. So that was my focus. I wasn't just looking at 2023. I was looking at 2023 and beyond. And my need was the combination of the floor and the ceiling of the player or players currently occupying that role. So if we take linebacker, for example, it's the combination of who's currently on the role or in this on this Bills roster. So if we've got Matt Milano as a starter, the other linebacker spot, it's the combination of the floor and ceiling of Terrell Bernard and Tyrell Dodson and Balin Spector, who I'm going to continue to refer to as Babylon Spector, just like I did last year, and Tyler Matakevich. It's the combination of their floor plus ceiling in terms of what they could do in 2023 and beyond, and that's how I define need. But again, everybody defines things differently. So I want to start to go through the chat. Oh, I appreciate you. Why says really looking forward to the show. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. RJ comes through and says, for me at least, I think we need middle linebacker, wide receiver, right tackle, defensive tackle, and safety in that order. Safety is an interesting one, right? Let's speak about it for a little bit. Bill signed Taylor Rapp yesterday to a 1-year deal. A move that I liked. He was a person who I had earmarked as a potential Jordan Poyer replacement. Wasn't at the top of my list, but he's an above average starter with quality reps and snaps in a defense that's been successful over the past several years. He has a Super Bowl ring. He can be used in a variety of personnel groupings and packages and alignments defensively. I think he's got an interesting skill set. And so he was someone who I was like, that could be a replacement person potentially for Jordan Poyer. But then Poyer signed, and I kind of just forgot about Taylor Rapp. And then he signs that deal in an offseason that The safety market has been so weird. Jordan Poyer comes back on a very team-friendly deal for the Buffalo Bills. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who I really, really, really like, signs like a 1-year, $8 million deal with Detroit. The safety market was an odd one this offseason. And the Bills add Taylor Rapp. Safety was a bigger need on my list going into this season. I think it's a bigger need for me in 2024 and beyond, because next year we could potentially be having this exact same discussion. Is Micah Hyde going to come back? Does he test free agency? What does he get offered on the open market? Taylor Rapp will then be an unrestricted free agent next year with Hyde. So then you're looking at just having Poyer. You might be just doing this exact same dance again in terms of trying to figure out the safety grouping. So I think that's fair for you, RJ. Andrew says, I need some positivity. I've been battling the negativity crowd on Twitter, and it's exhausting. Oh, Twitter is exhausting. As a person who uses Twitter for the purpose of promoting the show and engagement and things, it's really awesome to connect with people. But it can be a toxic wasteland of god awfulness. So I wish you luck on Twitter, Andrew. Godspeed. Pop says a lot of players that seem to fit well into the puzzle. Absolutely. Oh, awesome comment from Roy. He says the tree is lit and ready to go. It's the last episode in March, so we're still rocking the St. Patrick's Day style garland on the little tree. That'll switch to next month. Probably go with some Easter theme because Easter is in April, so go with some pastel colors like we did last year, and then jazz it up a bit for draft week because I view the draft as a celebration, and I view it like Christmas, so it'll be a Merry Draftmas. So we'll see what happens there. Awesome comment here from Ray, I believe. That's how it's pronounced. If it's wrong, I apologize. Who says, the Yankees suck, Thomas. That's for Thomas. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate you. Let's see. Oh, Billy says the rumor is the Bills are moving up in round 1 to take Pittsburgh's spot. This is something that we talked about last week, myself and Russell Brown, when I had him on the show last week. Pittsburgh is an interesting team to watch because of their lack of linebackers on the roster right now. They are a team, whether their first pick at 17 or they also pick at, I believe, 32 and another pick in the 40s. They are a team that could muddy the linebacker waters for the Buffalo Bills. I already didn't think, not even related to the Steelers, I didn't think that Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson, or really either of them, would last until the Bills' second round pick at pick 59. But the Steelers are one of those significant reasons why one of, if not both of them, will drop to the Buffalo Bills because of their need. So I think that's interesting that they are potentially, again, I'm not saying that they would move up to take Pittsburgh's spot because of that solely, but it's interesting because I've had my eye on the Steelers just because of that piece. Ooh, Thomas says, position need number 1, linebacker, number 2, defensive tackle, number 3, wide receiver, number 4, LL, left lineman. I was going to say, I was making a joke, offensive line. That's what I thought, Thomas. Well played. What's interesting with what I noticed on Twitter as well, when everybody gave their rankings, not only did people have different number 1s, again, I think majority of them were skewed to the defense. Majority were linebacker, and then probably defensive tackle or defensive end. But the 2 through 4 or the 2 through 3 or the 2 through 5 for people, again, a lot of the same answers. I think we all know at this point what, if we cast a wide net, what the needs are for this roster, but how people view them. You had rankings everywhere. I saw a lot of defensive tackle, a lot of wide receiver, a lot of offensive line, but the order was different from almost person to person. And the reasoning behind all of it was almost different from person to person. So I thought that was very interesting. Oh, Andrew coming in saying right tackle is need number 1, defensive tackle is 2, edge is number 3. This is a great comment here from Pops. Pops says that linebacker is the biggest need, since I'm not sure Dodson can be an every game starter, I should say. That is going to be heavily related. Oh, I'm just going to keep cycling through a lot of answers here. Anthony, great name, says linebacker, wide receiver, defensive tackle. Sarah says wide receiver, offensive line, D-line. Billy says D-line and wide receiver in rounds 1 and 2. Ooh. Alex coming in. Not our current middle linebackers. Neither is starting caliber. That's fair. Oh, Pete, what's up, Pete? Pete says right tackle, middle linebacker, 3 tech. I like the specificity. Defensive end, wide receiver, and 1 tech. And again, see, we continue to see the themes similar to what I saw on Twitter today when I put out that poll. Pop saying linebacker, right tackle, defensive tackle, wide receiver. I like how Alex emphasizes this. I meant our current middle linebacker situation is precarious. I think that's fair. Oh, Positivity from Stan. Stan says, I think when we have a deep squad like Buffalo, the needs get a little murky. That's a fair point, right? I know how the season ended this past year. I think we all do. The Bills do have a deep roster. My issue with it is I think the top tier talent isn't necessarily where it should be in order to compete with the big dogs in the AFC, and then in the NFC by extension. Although I think the AFC is a much stronger conference. But this Bills team is deep. There's no way to really get around that when you look at a team that, like, you take corner, for instance, right? Tre'Davious White starts the season on the pup, and Kyrie Elam is having his thing, and you've got Dane Jackson, you've got Christian Benford, and then those guys drop out in the game against Miami, and you get legitimate contributing snaps from Jamarcus Ingram against the Miami Dolphins in Miami. The defensive line faded towards the end of the year, but you got quality reps from Brandon Bryant, Neely Yanku, like early in the year, and just Kingsley Jonathan saw some reps and wasn't bad against Chicago. Like, I think they have good depth overall, especially towards the bottom. But for me, my issue with this roster overall, it's a separate conversation from tonight's episode, but my overall main issue with this roster is the lack of top tier talent that they potentially have. And I connect that to a lot of their swings and misses in the second round and third round over the past several years, which I did an episode on several weeks ago. I'm not saying that just to plug it, but I think that's, the reason for a lot of their top tier struggles or misses. Again, overall, this is a deep roster. It's the reason you can lose a starter and have a second or third string guy fill in. That means those second and third string guys are well coached and they're good players. Or if you want to play devil's advocate, it means the starter and the first stringer maybe wasn't that much better than a second or third stringer because they're not that top tier capability. So it's a bit of a yin and yang situation, but I like where you're at. Elizabeth comes in and says, middle linebacker, D-line, both defensive tackle and edge. I can't decide and would feel a little better if they'd have already extended Daquan Jones. Why have they not done this yet? And then it's a tie between wide receiver and offensive tackle. Daquan Jones is an interesting one. I got asked that question today on Twitter. I loved his signing last year. I loved his performance. I think we all realized how important he was in that playoff game against the Bengals. If you didn't know how important he was already, that game really showed you what was up. But I think it's a combination of the position that he plays and or his age. He's into his early 30s, I believe 32 or 33 years old right now. So maybe the extension, they're kind of just, playing it safe right now. But that's something that we will talk about going forward on this episode. Ooh, another answer here. Right tackle, wide receiver, interior defensive line, edge, linebacker in that order, particularly right tackle, because I have no faith in Spencer Brown's ability to not get Josh Allen hurt. Very fair, very fair, very fair. Comment here, with the departure of both Edmonds and Frazier, do you see a philosophical change in the Bills defense, either personnel and or scheme? That's related to one of my points that we're about to bring up. Good question. Wow, a lot of comments. I don't know why I'm surprised with all the comments. Why saying wide receiver, linebacker, offensive line, defensive line, running back. Again, a lot of similar thoughts. Low Buff says, so many floors and ceilings. Is this a home repair pod now? Get out. I appreciate you, but get out. You've been hitting on all cylinders recently, Chris, with all your jokes, whether on Twitter or here. You're batting close to 1,000. I'm really proud of you. Well done. Again, I'm going to keep cycling through these comments again, because I just wanted to put into perspective. These echo a lot of the comments that take it back. Low Buff says, Sale will get hurt on opening day. Don't do that. That's bad. That's bad form and bad sportsmanship. That's really rude and mean. Disappointing. But again, a lot of the similar sentiments that we saw on Twitter, some sort of combination of linebacker, offensive line, wide receiver, defensive tackle, edge, some combination of that, some semblance of that, depending on the order. So I think we know what the core groupings are. We had to cast that wide net. We're seeing that theme. We're seeing similarity from, again, what everybody said on Twitter in response to that comment. So I enjoy seeing all the comments that you folks have here, because again, I like to see the theme and see where your heads are at. And I think that puts us into a very interesting conversation now moving forward on this episode. Well, I like this comment here from Anthony saying McDermott wants a violent defense. Interesting. Ooh, underrated comment here from Roy. Roy saying they need a better tight end than Morris to run effective 12 personnel. Tight end is like not a shaky need, but like a secret or weird need, because I think Quentin Morris is okay, but you could also do better than Quentin Morris. That's a conversation we're going to have here on this episode. So again, I'm going to shift it now towards my rankings. I'll continue to bring up everything that you folks put into the chat as much as I can and tie it all together. But again, for me, defining the needs for the Buffalo Bills, in terms of ranking their needs, I first had to define it. And my definition of need is the combination of floor plus ceiling of a player or players currently occupying that role or position in 2023 and beyond. So with that being said, my number one, I'm going with linebacker. The current linebackers on the Buffalo Bills are Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, Tyrell Dodson, Tyler Matakevich, Balin Spector, who I will refer to as Babylon for the entire rest of the episode. You have an all-pro linebacker in Matt Milano, which feels awesome to say. And then you have a whole bunch of meh and question marks and/or question marks. And this linebacker position is one that is tremendously difficult and tremendously important to this defense. You have to live in the light and the dark. You have to be responsible for fitting the run while also be responsible for a multitude of coverage responsibilities in the pass. And then to push that further, like we've talked about a bunch on this show, and as everybody kind of knows at this point, the Bills are a nickel defense. And a majority of the time, not only are they a nickel defense, but they couple that with either 7 or 6 man boxes. So when you have a nickel defense, coupled with playing 7 and 6 man boxes, your linebackers are going to be stressed and strained mentally and physically, even more so than they already are, living again in that light and the dark with having the responsibilities in the run and also having the responsibilities in the pass. Now, potential caveat here, and it's related to a comment that was mentioned earlier about the potential philosophical change of the Bills defense with Edmonds departing and Leslie Frazier departing. So a potential caveat here is maybe with Sean McDermott calling plays and having more or further control of this defense that he potentially already did, maybe the identity of the linebacker role and potentially, again, this defense, maybe that changes philosophically or structurally. But as of right now, this position for me, I don't want to say it's the only hole, but it is a legitimate hole. Tyrell Dodson is what he is. No disrespect. I think he's fine. I think you saw his limitations at the position, at the very least, in terms of mitigating the absence of Tremaine Edmonds when Tremaine Edmonds was absent from this defense in 2022. I think he's fine. He's fine for depth. He's good on special teams. I think Tyrell Dodson is what he is. I do not think he's a starting linebacker in the NFL. Tyler Matakevich, similar boat. I actually would be more intrigued to see Tyler Matakevich start over Tyrell Dodson. I know it's usually been in cleanup duty or mop-up duty, but it seems like Tyler Matakevich is always making plays every time he comes in like mop-up duty in the fourth quarter. Like he gets an interception or gets a pass breakup, makes a nice play in coverage. So I'd be more interested or inclined to see Tyler Matakevich than I would Tyrell Dodson. Now, the big two that I feel like people have talked about a lot or given the most pushback on when it comes to the linebacker position in terms of addressing it outside the current roster is Terrell Bernard and or Babylon Spector. Again, I'm going to continue to say Babylon on purpose. I know his name is Balin. I just want to continue to say that, but from now on going forward, I would just be saying Babylon. Even if you have the highest of hopes for Terrell Bernard or Spector, all you have are hopes and a very, 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 very small sample size to base those hopes on. And that's just for Terrell Bernard. Balin. I should have kept the Babylon. I can't believe I said Balin. I'm so sorry. Babylon Spector only has preseason reps. He's never seen meaningful reps in a regular NFL season game. Terrell Bernard has a bit, but that sample size is limited. Last season, and again, maybe it's not fair because it's a different position and it's different players and the variables aren't the same and you're not comparing like for like, but last season, basing a position on hope is what the Bills did with right tackle in Spencer Brown, and that did not work out. There is not a suitable replacement for Tremaine Edmonds currently on the Buffalo Bills roster. Again, if you are trying to replicate his role or mitigate his loss. So I'm going to continue to throw that caveat in there. Maybe the Bills are looking to change the middle linebacker role or change the linebackers in general in terms of responsibilities, in terms of skill set, which can happen. Tremaine Edmonds was responsible for a lot and allowed this Bills defense to wear the multitude of hats that they wore. So if you remove a unicorn and a pterodactyl like that, it's fair to surmise that maybe that role changes and then thus the rest of the defense changes by extension. Because what Edmonds did, a lot of what he did, I know he wasn't the flashiest and didn't make all the splash plays, but his role as a deterrent because of his size and his athleticism, it muddied the waters and gummed up the works for a lot of offenses in the middle of the field and allowed the Bills to play those coverages on the back end and merge them with the fronts that they had. So not having him, again, maybe they just say, you know what, we can't get someone to replicate that role because Edmonds legitimately, like him or hate him, Edmonds is legitimately a unicorn. We're not going to be able to get another unicorn. Screw it. Let's change the defense or let's change the role or change the position. I think that's a very fair assumption. But until we see that and know that, I don't want to start going off that. It's gonna tie in. Appreciate you always recognizing that. It's gonna tie in because if they do want to change the identity of that role or they want to change the defense, that's a very fair assumption to make and potentially guess at. But we don't know that right now. And I want to pull this comment here earlier of what sort of scheme did McD run in Carolina. So myself and Eric Turner are going to be breaking that down tomorrow in the Cover One film room. But to talk on it a bit here, what's very interesting, and I don't know if people don't know or don't remember, Sean McDermott as a defensive coordinator is a very aggressive defensive coordinator. He's mugging A gaps. He's crowding the line of scrimmage. He's going to show you looks that make you confused as to who's rushing and from where. He is going to more, again, vanilla coverages on the back end. But his idea of defense is very aggressive, fast flowing, hard hits, attack minded when it comes to his calls and when it comes to his looks. He is a student of Jim Johnson, former Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator in the late 90s and into the 2000s. And Jim Johnson's defenses in Philadelphia those are the Jeremiah Trotter, Brian Dawkins, Hugh Douglas defenses that were known for just being mean and loud and angry. And they were a defense that was trained and coached to be like velociraptors before this current iteration of the San Francisco 49ers defense operated like that. So McDermott's identity defensively when he's the defensive coordinator is a fast, aggressive, mean type of defense. And that's not just within the individual players, that's within his calls and it's within his scheme and it's within his design. So maybe he goes into that bag a little bit more. I'm very excited for Sean McDermott to be the defensive play caller for this team. I actually think it could be a potentially a step up for this Bills defense, given the schematic and philosophical shifts that they needed to have in order to potentially and finally get over the hump in the AFC. Very good question. Very good question. So again, with linebacker, there is that caveat of maybe the role changes or maybe the defense changes because Leslie Frazier's gone and Tremaine Edmonds is gone, which is fair. But I will still maintain that there's not a suitable replacement for Tremaine Edmonds currently on this Bills roster. Even if you're not completely trying to replicate him or mitigate his loss and you're going in a different direction, you have what you have in Tyrell Dodson. He is what he is. Tyler Medikevich is what he is. Terrell Bernard and Babylon Spector, again, you can like them. That's fine. I like Terrell Bernard, right? I thought he flashed some positive pieces last year against the Jets when he saw significant work. Granted, that was the only game where he saw significant work. He saw a handful of snaps against the Steelers, but that was a throwaway game by the time he got in there. I just can't put the hopes of a position of this importance to the Buffalo Bills defense. I can't take that position and put it on the shoulders of a guy who wasn't active after week 11 last year and who was only active for 6 games total. I don't think you can take a guy like that and expect him to step into a starting role. I think that's a lot to ask. Now, devil's advocate, you could say the exact same thing for any rookie coming into the Bills lineup. If somebody says, I don't have faith in Bernard, give me Trenton Simpson or Jack Campbell, right? You could make that exact same comment and say, because technically Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson, they have less sample size than Terrell Bernard because they literally have 0 NFL snaps of any kind, preseason, regular season, anything. Any rookie that's coming in is further projection technically and further hope than Terrell Bernard because you have no meaningful NFL reps for them. So you genuinely have no idea if they're going to prosper or if they're going to completely flame out. But for me, looking towards the draft, I think there are several players who fit better in terms of projecting to a starting off-ball linebacker role in the NFL in general, but especially for the Buffalo Bills defense. Now, the flip side of it, and I think this is part of it too, does that mean that Terrell Bernard was a waste of a third-round pick? Which is a bit of an annoying question to ask, tying back into something I mentioned earlier in this episode, which is some of the top tier talent for the Buffalo Bills not necessarily being there or not being present on the roster. And for me, that's tied to the swings and misses they've had in rounds 2 and round 3. So if you draft a linebacker in round 1 or round 2, you bring in that replacement for Tremaine Edmonds. That relegates Terrell Bernard pretty much guaranteed to a backup role, knock on wood, providing injury doesn't happen. That means he's pretty much relegated to a backup role for, I don't want to say the entirety of his rookie contract, but a significant chunk, especially with Milano getting his contract extension. So then you're looking at Terrell Bernard as a backup, as a depth guy, maybe as the third linebacker if you're going 3 linebacker sets, and a special teams guy. So I know that isn't ideal from a value perspective for people, but I don't think you can necessarily thrust him into a starting role just because it's like, well, they drafted him with a 3rd-round pick, so you have to throw him in there and see what's up. I don't think you have to. I get that notion, and I think that's where a lot of people are coming from recently, but I don't think you need to put all your stock into a guy just because you use resources and allocated them towards that guy. And it's like, well, we have to see what we got. We have to try and prove ourselves right. No, if you don't think the guy is the guy, that sucks. Cut your losses and move on. Don't keep sinking funds and money and cost into something that's not working. If you bought a restaurant and it's hemorrhaging money, there's a certain point, it's like, you know what? Let's not keep pouring money in. You don't want to just be like, no, I bought this. I'm going down with the ship. Let's keep pouring money in everything. At a certain point, you're not going to get that return on investment. And if you continue to pour resources into it, you only dig yourself a deeper hole. I'm not saying that's the exact same thing with Terrell Bernard, but I think there are some similarities with that. Yes, you took him with the 3rd-round pick. Yes, it would be fantastic if he was ready to step in and you had Tremaine Edmonds leave and it was like, you know what? That's fine. We had a linebacker we took in the 3rd round last year. We'll start him. Everything's going to be great. I would love for that to be the case. My worry with it is, again, everything with Terrell Bernard is just hope. I liked his tape enough when they drafted him last year. I think he's more suited for a Matt Milano style of role in terms of that will linebacker, that chaos creator, that linebacker designed to come forward and shoot gaps and cover running backs one-on-one and be in that short side of the area than he is a middle linebacker. Similar where, Milano could function in that Tremaine Edmonds role, but it's still different in terms of what his skill set is. I think Bernard's role and skill set lends itself more to Matt Milano's position. And with Milano being locked up long-term and being the guy even more so now with Tremaine Edmonds leaving, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And I don't think Bernard's skill set puts him into Edmonds' role now. If they change the idea or identity of that role or the defense with Sean McDermott taking over, maybe that's, got some potential, and that could be something that happens on the horizon. And then as far as Babylon Spector, it's just further projection and further hope. You have nothing. You have his reps in the preseason. You have some really good snaps against the Indianapolis Colts in the preseason, but it's just preseason work. I do think he's more physically limited than Bernard, and he does some things that are nice, but not enough to regularly occupy that starting position. For me, I don't love the linebacker class in this draft, and I don't love the idea of going linebacker with the first pick for the Bills in this draft, or necessarily even in round 2, given the value that I think will be available at some other positions. In a perfect world, given the need that the Bills have at linebacker, I would love for Jack Campbell or Trenton Simpson to fall to the Bills at 59 in the 2nd round. I don't think that happens. I think both of them are gone and scooped up by pick 59, which means if the Bills want to address this position, they have to go with one of them in round 1, or you potentially try and fit in a Henry To'oTo'o, or maybe you like DeMarvion Overshawn. And this is the other issue with some of the linebackers in this class, right? A lot of them I know Deion Henley has been a popular one for Bills Mafia. Overshown from Texas has been a popular one. Dorian Williams from Tulane has been a popular one. Oh, cool one from Charles. He says Cam Jones, rounds 4 through 5. I love Cam Jones at the Senior Bowl. Very fair. The issue with that is a lot of them, Cam Jones has more middle linebacker skill set and traits. But a lot of the guys I listed off, like Overshown and even Trenton Simpson to a degree, but Henley and Dorian Williams, a lot of those guys are suited to be more of wills, or they're used in more jack of all trades type of roles on their current teams. Now, that doesn't mean you can't put them at off-ball linebacker in the box and have them learn that one spot and get better at that one spot. But again, it's more projection, and they are look at their frame and their skill set and who they are. I don't want to get too sidetracked into the draft prospects, but for me, based on the skill set and based on what I've seen in studying the tape, Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson are the top two fits. See the comment here, Drew Sanders from Arkansas. I'm not a huge fan of Sanders, and part of what also holds me back for his fit with the Bills is a significant chunk of his value is what you can do with him on third down and putting him on the defensive line or putting him on the edge and letting him rush the passer. I don't know if that is necessarily what the Bills are going to do with a linebacker of his ilk. Like again, maybe they will, maybe they switch it up. Maybe this defense goes more versatile and more interchangeable personnel in terms of who lines up where and who has what responsibility and who wears what hat on this play. And, maybe with Taylor Rapp coming in now, he's functioning as the dime linebacker on third downs, and you take Drew Sanders and you line him up on the edge and you got this whole weird amoeba type of front and package. That could happen. But as of right now, I don't think he's necessarily a scheme fit, because a lot of what he does well is that rush the passer third down kind of piece coming off the edge. And whether he's a spiker as a looper or rushing one-on-one, the Bills necessarily haven't necessarily done that in this previous tenure. And you follow it up with McD's rushing tendencies, though. Again, could happen, with a more aggressive Sean McDermott. But given what he does in coverage, for me, I think Trenton Simpson, with his athleticism, his speed, the coverages that he ran at Clemson, or Jack Campbell with his size, his athleticism at that size, combined with the match coverage, man coverage, mirroring ability for tight ends and running backs and even some wide receivers, I think their tape speaks better to potentially projecting for the Buffalo Bills. But again, it's to each their own. I know a lot of people like Drew Sanders. I know he's been kind of mercurial. Some people had him as like linebacker 1 for them. And then as we've gone through this process, he's been dropping down further. So he's been having an interesting offseason in terms of a pre-draft process, but that's very fair. So again, for me, I'm looking towards the draft. I wanted Levante David. I thought he was the best free agent option to mitigate the loss of Tremaine Edmunds, given his knowledge, his processing, his skill set, and his familiarity with that type of Tremaine Edmunds role coming from Tampa with what was asked of him. I don't know if anybody saw, but I guess Levante David said the Bills reached out to him in free agency, but by the time they reached out to him, he had already made the decision to come back to Tampa Bay, which made me want to punch myself in the face. So we know that they were looking. I also know the Bobby Wagner rumors. Some of them were, I don't know if those are necessarily true. I know it was reported for a while that the Bills were in on Bobby Wagner or super in on Bobby Wagner, but then it turned out that I don't think those are from a reputable source, so that's kind of murky. But we do know that the Bills kicked the tires on Levante David, so it does look like they're trying to address this position. I know what Sean McDermott said yesterday about Dodson and Bernard, but I think a lot of that is coach speak. Maybe he does genuinely believe in those guys being the starter, but to play devil's advocate, you're not going to trash your guys that are currently on the roster in general, but especially if the draft or free agency doesn't fall your way and you have to thrust one of them into a starting spot, that's not a situation you want to be in. If you had, previously said, oh yeah, the starter isn't on the roster, we got to go somewhere else. So that's not ideal. Long story short, for me, linebacker is number 1 for this Buffalo Bills team because it's a legitimate hole. And because, again, my definition of need is the combination of floor and ceiling of a player or players currently occupying that position on the team in 2023 and beyond. And based on what you have in Spector and Bernard and Dodson and Medikevich, I don't think that starter is on this roster. So therefore, you need a legitimate starter, and that's why it's number one for me, which, ooh, we'll see. Oh, Amicus coming in and saying Balin Spector can do it. I like that you have faith. I like that you have faith in Spector. I just, again, even if you have the most hope in Spector, sounded like I said Inspector, even if you have a ton of faith or hope, and you're putting that into Babylon Spector, I should say, it's still all just hope and projection. You genuinely don't know. Again, you don't know that about a rookie either. You don't know that about Jack Campbell. You don't know that about Trenton Simpson. So it's still projection. For me, I just think they project better than Spector does. And I don't want to go in on too much hope or too much projection, like last year with the Bills and Spencer Brown. It scared me a bit. Scared me a bit. I don't know if this comment is from me, from Voodoo Rage, who said, this dude really wants a Mike linebacker so they could get lots of tackles. Tacklers don't move the needle. That's not what I want from my middle linebacker. From my middle linebacker, I want somebody who can stack and shed and fit the run and make tackles, absolutely. But I want my middle linebacker to be able to match coverage in quarters. I want them to be able to run the middle of the field in Tampa 2. I want them to be able to robot and scan and pick up number 3 receivers or number 2 receivers in coverage. A lot of it for me is coverage based in terms of what Tremaine Edmonds did in picking up slot receivers and tight ends and recognizing who to pass off on the drag and who to pick up on the post or who to pick up on the dig, or his ability to get underneath those intermediate routes and clog up the passing lanes and get pass breakups. That's what I'm looking for in a linebacker, somebody who can literally do everything. You have to have that in a variety of ways, and you have to have that in spades. I'm not looking for a middle linebacker, in terms of just somebody who can get tackles. Especially when you look at like Jack Campbell and Trenton Simpson and what they were asked to do, they're much more than just like tacklers, especially Campbell, who I initially thought was more just like a traditional like thumper coming forward. But with what was asked of him from a coverage perspective at Iowa, he's more than that. So for me, no. Voodoo Ray says, okay, I'll give you that. That would move the needle. Yeah. Don't make assumptions, my man. You got a question, feel free to ask, but don't just throw out assumptions. But I appreciate you for being here. Thank you very much. But yeah, it's got to be somebody who can do everything. That's what complicates the position, right? It's not just what it used to be, where it was like, oh yeah, just play the run and come forward and, knock some guards in the mouth and make tackles. You got to be able to do so much. And if you can't do that, if you're just a run defending linebacker, then offenses have the ability to dictate to you and put you into disadvantageous positions because they know your skill set and they know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. And they can use your siloed skill set against you and the defense. That's what worries me a little bit. So linebacker is my number one. And again, for that reason, I don't think there's a current starter on this roster. And the players that are on the roster, I think their combination, whoever you're looking at, if it's Bernard, if it's Spector, if it's somebody else who you think can step into that Edmonds role, I don't think the combination of the floor and ceiling of those players occupying that role in 2023 and beyond is high enough to make this not a need. So linebacker is a definite need. From seeing a lot of your comments in the comments, I think most of you agree. Again, there was a popular comment on Twitter as well this afternoon, so very fair. Let's move on to my number 2 Buffalo Bills roster need. Offensive tackle. I like this comment from Cash, who says, offensive line, defensive line, repeat. So I'm kind of in lockstep with you here on this one. Offensive tackle is my number 2. And in an ideal world, it's somebody who gets brought in to challenge or ideally beat out Spencer Brown. I know Spencer Brown can be, I don't even think he's a hot button topic now. I know actually people are on the two ends of the spectrum. Some people think, he had an injury plagued year and you got to give him, another chance with his ceiling and yada, yada. Other people think he is garbage and he needs to be jettisoned into the sun. I know the injuries last year hindered him, both in the offseason and in season. And yes, his ceiling is high because of his athleticism. And yes, I know he's still very raw because he played 8-man football in high school and he played college ball in Northern Iowa and he opted out of the COVID year. Those things are all very true. But as of right now, both on tape and with the advanced metrics, he is far too mercurial to be a starter on a team with championship aspirations or in an offense led by a top-tier QB. When you watch him on tape, what he continues to struggle with, he struggles with power at times. He struggles with recognizing games. He struggles with finesse or with speed. And when he loses bad. He loses quickly. He loses within a half of a second or a second and a half. For someone as athletic as he is, he often gets caught flat-footed. He'll get snatched and fall on his face. He'll get run through. And I think that's fine given his career trajectory. He is very raw. He is a ball of clay. I think he was thrust into a starting role earlier than he should have been. I think the injuries that he had in the offseason and in season last year did significantly hinder his development in terms of what he could be in year 2. But you need more consistency from that position. And if we're just looking at Spencer Brown, so I don't use PFF for grades, but I do like their efficiency metrics for offensive line blocking. So for PFF's efficiency score for offensive linemen, this score measures pressures allowed on a per snap basis, weighting towards sacks allowed. There were 88 tackles in 2022 that had at least 20% of pass protection snaps. So again, 88 tackles. Spencer Brown was tied for 69th in PFF's efficiency score amongst those 88 tackles. There were 206 offensive linemen total, again, tackles, guards, centers, 206 offensive linemen with at least 20% of pass protection snaps. Brown was tied for 180th out of those 206 in pass blocking efficiency in true pass sets. True pass sets are ones that have 4 or more rushers, no play action, no screens, no short dropbacks, and 2 or more seconds to throw. So basically, it removes some of the gimmicky variables from a pass play. So again, he was 180th out of 206 total offensive linemen in that area. He was 70th amongst 88 offensive tackles for true pass sets. So whether you're looking at all pass protection reps, he was 69th out of 88. If you're looking at true pass sets, he was 70th amongst the 88 offensive tackles. Now, volume stats aren't necessarily the end all be all because they're influenced by the type of offense you play in. So again, if you play in an offense that passes more, the more you pass, the more pressures you're likely to give up in theory. So because the Bills pass a lot, the next numbers I'm about to read you are somewhat skewed, but nonetheless, Spencer Brown was tied for the 8th most pressures allowed in 2022 amongst all offensive linemen, and he was tied for the 5th most amongst all tackles. And then in true pass sets, he was tied for the 3rd most pressures allowed amongst all offensive linemen. I'm not going to say he's a hole, right? I think at linebacker, you have a legitimate hole. You don't have a starter. You need to plug someone in. I'm not going to say Spencer Brown's a hole. I don't think that is a like for like with comparing the linebacker spot. But at the very, very least, he's a questionable starter. From snap to snap, you don't know what you're getting. There's far too much variance in his play, just like there was in the offensive line as a whole last year. I think the Bills addressed guard enough this offseason that has kind of backed me off the ledge a little bit when it's come to the interior offensive line. I think the combination of McGovern and Edwards coming in, plus Ryan Bates with what you already have, and then even Ike Butker, I think that's fine enough for starters and depth. Now, do I think McGovern or Edwards are going to come in and all of a sudden turn into all pros and the Bills are going to have this amazing interior? No, not necessarily. But I think what the Bills got from the interior last year was like D or maybe C plus play. And I think McGovern puts you to like a B minus or a B, maybe even a B plus. Edwards could fall into that same boat if he's healthy, right? Given his familiarity with Cromer and how he succeeded there. So that's a win, right? Granted, you didn't bring in an all pro guard. You didn't bring in Joe Tooney like the Chiefs did several years ago in free agency, but that's still a win to go from a D or a C up to a B, potentially a low D, high C, or a mid, low, or high B. I think that's still a win. So the interior, I'm finding I'm more confident on. I'm okay. Now, appreciate this comment from AJ. AJ says 124 likes, get that count up. Yes, please and thank you, folks. If you folks do enjoy this content and you like this episode, please, please, please and thank you. Drop a like. It goes a long way towards, I'm falling apart. We still got a lot of the show left. It goes a long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes. So please, if you're enjoying this, drop a like if you'd be so kind. And thank you very much for being here, AJ, and for dropping that like comment. I appreciate you. Steven says, yes, the interior offensive line looks good now. This is hilarious. Charles says, lost a Pro Bowler in Roger Saffold. That's a very good joke. That's a very good joke. That's a very good joke. I feel you, AJ. I knew what you meant. Yeah. Let's get more likes. Please, 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 and thank you. Appreciate you folks. Again, I think Spencer Brown, I think his ceiling is still somewhat there. And I'm not giving up on him. I'm not jettisoning him into the sun. I'm not saying that he's done. I'm not giving up on him. But at the very least, you need to give him competition. But for me, ideally, I think you need to bring in someone who supplants him as the starter. And then also looking at the rest of the position grouping. If Spencer Brown doesn't work out again, your options to replace him are Tommy Doyle or David Quessenberry. No disrespect to either of them. Is that ideal? Is that the right tackle combination you want to go at? Again, I'm not even thinking about Deion Dawkins, who's at left tackle. Your right tackle situation for a team that wants to win the Super Bowl and that is in the Super Bowl conversation. I know some people are off that wagon because of how they lost last year, but the Bills are still very much in the Super Bowl conversation. Do you really want your right tackle to either be Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, or David Quessenberry? For me, no, absolutely not. And I don't mean that to sound disrespectful or be disrespectful. Spencer Brown has been way too mercurial. He is way too much of a roller coaster, and I want off that ride. Ideally, for me, AJ comes in and says, Darnell Wright or Zay Flowers. I'm going to stick with the Darnell Wright piece for now since we're talking about offensive line. Well, actually, let me answer quickly for Steven. Steven says, I came in late, apologies. No worries, Steven. I appreciate you. He says, is offensive line your first priority in the first round, or is it middle linebacker? Oh, actually, that ties into what I'm about to say here with AJ's comment. My dream scenario for round one is still Darnell Wright, the right tackle from Tennessee. He's been my dream fit and scenario since I saw him at the Senior Bowl, since I watched him firsthand, since I interviewed him, since I studied his tape. I want him at right tackle. Dude's an athletic grizzly bear who I think offers a high floor, but also a high ceiling. I want him at 27. I don't think he's going to last until 27 at this point. Back when I really fell in love with him during the Senior Bowl, I thought it could definitely happen. I don't think he's going to last until pick 27. So for me right now, I think the Bills go linebacker in round one. If I had to, gun to my head, I'm thinking Jack Campbell is the pick in the first round, or Trenton Simpson. But I think Campbell is more of their guy from a scheme fit perspective, unless they really want to get crazy potentially with some philosophical and schematic designs by adding someone of Trent Simpson's ilk, which I would be a fan of because I like Trent Simpson. But I think Campbell's the guy. The only way I think Campbell's not the guy is if someone of tremendous value falls in the first round on the at any position. Honestly, it could be receiver, it could be interior defensive line, it could be tackle, it could be edge, it could honestly, all jokes aside, it could be running back. If Bijan Robinson falls to 27, the Bills took him and his Texas teammate Roshan Johnson out for dinner after meeting with them at their pro day. So I think that's still on the table, as it seems to be every single year. Ooh, like this one from Charles. Nolan Smith. I'd be a big fan of Nolan Smith coming from Georgia. I would not mind the Bills taking him and plugging him into edge. That ties into another point I'm going to make as we go on in the show. But yeah, unless somebody of really, really, really good value falls to the Bills at 27, I think the Bills go linebacker in the first round. Not necessarily because I think Campbell or Simpson are worth a first round pick, but I don't think you're getting either of them at pick 59, which means you either have to trade back from 27 or you have to trade up from 59. That's what is so annoying for me with this draft conversation, because this is not the draft to need a linebacker, because the top tier isn't necessarily top tier value that you get in regular drafts. And then the fit of all the other guys are more will or apex overhang type dudes, not necessarily middle linebacker plug and play for the scheme guys. There's more Terrell Bernards in this draft than there are Jack Campbells, to put it that way. And this is fair from Steven. Steven says it's not a reach for Campbell if the need is so great. That ties into Pete's comment here saying if you draft Campbell at 27 and he starts week 1 and for the next 5 years, he was worth the pick. Yeah, as long as he's good. I mean, if he's just starting just to start, and I'm not saying you mean this, but if he's just the starter because he's a de facto starter and he sucks, I don't know how worth it that is. My only worry is with what you're seeing in the draft right now, I think the 4 quarterbacks go before the Buffalo Bills pick at 27. So I think Levis go, not necessarily in this order, but Levis, Richardson, Young, and Stroud are all going to go. So the Bills have pick 27. If you take those 4 quarterbacks, now you're down to 23. Will Anderson's going to go. That's 22. Skoronski's going to go. Paris Johnson's going to go. That's 20. And you start to knock off the positions and the players that are going to go. Someone of value is going to drop to 27 at a position that isn't linebacker, right? That's my only concern. It could be Darnell Wright. If Darnell Wright and Jack Campbell are both there at 27, I know the need is greater for linebacker, but I'm taking Darnell Wright. Now, if they take Jack Campbell, I'm not going to be disappointed. I like Jack Campbell. I've studied a bunch of his tape. I've watched 6 full games of his. I really feel like he's going to end up being a Buffalo Bill. I really feel like he's going to be the pick in round 1. But if it's between Darnell Wright and Jack Campbell at pick 27, I'm going with Darnell Wright. But again, I don't think he's going to be there, so the conversation is kind of moot. And see, that's another comment here from Pops. This is a really good comment. Pop says, can you gamble with that big of a need to trade down and hope you can still get Campbell? That's exactly the worry, right? I don't know. One, you have to find a trade partner who's willing to dance with you and still get close enough. But then again, because it is that big of a need, do you want to take that risk? Do you want to sit there and be like, you know what, we could trade down to like 35 or 36 and get Campbell or Simpson? But they legitimately both might not be there anymore. Now, maybe they don't make that move unless they're 100% confident, so on and so forth. There's a ton of variables, but I think that is a significant gamble given the need that linebacker is for the Buffalo Bills. And that's where my conversation comes in, or my trepidation comes in. This is a good comment from Pete. Pete says, Campbell won't be the best player available. That's exactly right at 27. I don't think Campbell's going to be the best player available at 27. Now, does that mean he's bad? Absolutely not. Does that mean the need isn't still super, super, super important? Obviously, absolutely not. But I think you could get better value based on who I think could fall there at 27. And again, in an ideal world, it would be an offensive lineman if you're picking between. Oh, this is an interesting one from Spin. Spin says Darnell Wright or Anton Harrison. I like Anton Harrison from Oklahoma. Very athletic prospect. I think he has enough athleticism to play on that right side, although it's not the easiest transition, and he was primarily a left tackle at Oklahoma. What's interesting with Anton Harrison is even when he wins, his technique isn't clean. He's got messy feet or messy hands, but he's so strong and athletic that he's still able to win because of that athleticism and that strength. So imagine what he could be if he can clean up his technique. So I think Anton Harrison is a very interesting one. Another comment here from Steven saying, I'm assuming you mean JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba has to be the pick if he's there, right? I don't think he's going to fall to 27. I don't think there's any shot of that happening. But if he's there, that throws another wrench into the mix. That's also something I'm going to talk about a bit later in the show, but I like where your head's at. To circle it back, again, we got into that Darnell Wright conversation and the potential players and picks at 27. At the end of the day, for me, I still think offensive tackle is a big need for this team. And you're looking at who's left in free agency. The numbers dwindle by the day, similar to linebacker. And this free agent class for offensive linemen wasn't great to begin with, whether you're looking on the interior or at tackle. They got to draft a right tackle for me, given where this need is. I think this is the second most important need on this team. This is a good comment. Is that Darrell Williams' music? It's just concerning that we continue to see the very mercurial play from Spencer Brown. Now, maybe with an entire offseason of health and practice and a guy who's not banged up and a guy who's able to get through the season potentially healthy, maybe that helps him see some more of that potential or that ceiling that was envisioned for him when he was drafted. Again, his whole timeline's been thrown up. He wasn't supposed to see the snaps he saw as a rookie. He got, kind of thrown into the fire a bit early, which, depending on what side of the coin you look at, could be good or could be bad for him. But here's the comment here from Palmer saying, y'all hating on Spencer Brown. He was hurt all offseason last year. And that's what I'm talking about. He was hurt in the offseason. He was hurt in season. And for a guy that is that raw and that green and that inexperienced, every single rep matters. right? Every single offseason snap, whether it's in mini camp, whether it's in training camp, whether it's in the preseason, every single snap and rep matters for a guy when he needs experience and he needs polish. But at the end of the day, right now, whether it's his fault or it's, outstanding or extraneous variables that have led to him being the player that he is, at the end of the day, he's a very mercurial player right now. Now, I'm not saying we need to give him a pass. I'm not saying that he deserves to be the guy. I'm not saying he shouldn't get criticism, or I'm not saying he should get criticism. At the end of the day, when you're looking at him as a player, whether it's due to the injuries, whether it's due to coaching, whether it's due to him, whether it's due to scheme, whether it's due to anything, right? At the end of the day, Spencer Brown is a very up and down mercurial player with a ton of variance at right tackle. And I don't think you can continue to have that kind of vulnerability. Now, you could play a little bit on the other side and say, okay, well, if the rest of the line is solid, if Dawkins is solid and McGovern's solid and Morse is solid and Bates is solid, maybe you can take a bit of a risk at your right tackle spot. But for me, I don't want to continue to put my eggs in that Spencer Brown basket. I did it last year. I went off the hope and projection. I'm still a little worried. And Steven's coming in and saying Joe Marino has Spencer Brown as his Dawson Knox breakout candidate. That's cool. I really hope he does break out. It would solve a ton of questions and issues for this team. He's going into year 3. If he has a solid year this year, you got him for year 3 and year 4. So you have a starting right tackle on a cost-controlled contract. He still has that athleticism, that upside. I really, 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 really want him to be the guy. And again, he has shown some positive flashes. You watch the power, you watch the explosion, you watch the violence, you watch the aggression. I also will say, I think he's a better run blocker than he is pass protector. And his issues, right, where he needs to clean things up from a game recognition standpoint and a technique standpoint, especially with his hands and his feet, those are correctable, right? So there is, I understand if people want hope or people think he's a breakout guy or people think, no, it's wrong to pull the plug on him. Again, I'm not pulling the plug on him. I just don't want to continue to go into another season like we did last year, hoping that he's going to be the breakout candidate, right? Or going off of projection. Because what we've seen right now, at the end of the day, right now, what we know of him as a player, extremely athletic, physical, great in space, good mover, but very inconsistent in pass protection and overall. And that inconsistency is, I think, what you need to kind of level out with the offensive line. I said it a couple episodes back. I would love for this Bills offensive line to be a top 10 unit, but I don't think you necessarily need that given Josh Allen's athleticism and pocket manipulation and maneuverability. Just give me a top 15 offensive line, but have it consistently be top 15. The problem with the Bills offensive line is I feel like they're middling and they grade out to be like 15th to 19th, depending on what you're looking at. But the issue is 1 week they'll be 15. The next week they'll be 10. The next week they'll be 20. The next week they'll be 5th. The next week they'll be 20th. And it's just that roller coaster. And I think that's also a microcosm of Spencer Brown's play, or Spencer Brown's play is a microcosm of the offensive line, is that mercurial nature's got to stop. You can't have that from snap to snap, drive to drive, wondering, oh, somebody going to get beat really bad on this one. That's why I like the Connor McGovern signing. I don't think he's going to be an all-pro. I think he's a step towards solid baseline, solid floor. I think he's a step towards just give me a B. I don't need an A- or an A or an A+ at every offensive line position. Just don't give me any C's and don't give me any D's. Give me a bunch of B-level players. Give me consistency. Give me baseline that just goes like this. I don't need to have the high highs if they're going to come with the low lows. And that's what it is with Spencer Brown. Ooh, good comment here from Pete. Pete says the only thing we're hanging on to is that Brown has potential and was hurt, and that's not enough. And that's my concern, right? Even if it is, well, he's got all this potential. Even if it is, he was hurt last offseason and hurt in the season. I think those are all true, and I think those are fair. Again, I think he still has that potential. I do think him being injured last year, preseason, offseason, in season, I do think that hurt his development and it hindered his play. That's absolutely true. But at the end of the day, right now, I don't think he's a reliable starter. Does that mean he won't turn into a reliable starter? Absolutely not. But for me, it's too risky to put those eggs into that basket again. And I like this comment from AK Cash. He says, McGovern's pass pro is low key God tier. He is a good pass protector. That is fair. I don't know if I'm calling it God tier, but that's fair. Oh, Buddha Rage is a good. He says, had to look up mercurial. Definition is subject to sudden or unpredictable changes of mood or mind. And I think that applies to Spencer Brown. Think about Spencer Brown, right? One play, he's mauling some linebacker on the second level, and everybody's like, yo, like that linebacker got wrecked. That was beautiful. And on the next play, he's getting beat around the edge and falling on his face and giving up a pressure within a second. It's that up and down. And again, he has the opportunity to stabilize a little bit and stop being so mercurial. But I don't want to go into another season where Josh Allen has to worry about the protection up front. Now, I think they've stabilized left tackle through right guard, but we'll see. And that's why it's number 2 for me. Again, and this isn't even just holistically on Spencer Brown with offensive tackle as my number 2 need. It's part Spencer Brown. It's part the rest of what the Bills have. The Bills tackle grouping right now is Deion Dawkins, Tommy Doyle, David Quessenberry, and Spencer Brown. If Dawkins goes down, if Spencer Brown goes down, even if you have a ton of faith in Spencer Brown, even if, like Steven said, if or Joe Marino said, if Spencer Brown is your Dawson Knox breakout candidate this year, awesome. What happens if he goes down? What happens if Deion Dawkins goes down? Now you're sitting there and you are looking at, again, no disrespect, but you're looking at Tommy Doyle, you're looking at David Quessenberry or Alec Anderson or Ryan Van DeMark as your guys coming in. That's what's worrisome. So the depth, the functional depth of the tack grouping isn't ideal in general. Again, for me, dream scenario in round 1 is Darnell Wright. Even if it's not Darnell Wright, round 2, round 3, round 4, bring in some tackle depth. I would love for Spencer Brown to be the swing tackle. But even if he works out at number 2, cool. Draft another tackle and have him be your depth guy, just to hedge your bets in case Spencer Brown doesn't work out. Or it doesn't even have to be like a Darnell Wright who, man, this is the camp battle, this is the guy. But bring in somebody with some upside or some semblance of a 4 and have him battle it out with Spencer Brown. And you know what happens? If Spencer Brown comes into camp and he cleaned up a lot of the inconsistencies, cool. He beats out the dude that you brought in to compete against him. And that dude you brought in to compete against him is now functional depth for the next 4 years. That's a win. And you can never go wrong by having depth on the offensive line. Ever. So, and this is partly on me because I started the conversation with Spencer Brown and then we had it going on in the chat. Part of this need for me isn't just replacing Spencer Brown. It's the tackle grouping as a whole. Again, the depth chart for the Bills tackles right now is Deion Dawkins, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Van DeMark, Spencer Brown, David Quessenberry, Alec Anderson. If Spencer Brown is a questionable piece, what is everything else behind him? Or behind Deion Dawkins? What happens if Dawkins goes down? This group is screwed. I don't want to say screwed. That's a bit dramatic, but it's not great. And then if Spencer Brown goes down, then you're looking at David Quessenberry again, who I think is fine as depth and as a leader and a veteran presence. I don't necessarily know if I want him in the game, especially after having that replay in my head of him getting beat around the corner by Bryce Huff on the play that injured Josh Allen. Offensive tackle is need number 2 for me, not just for 2023, but also for beyond. The depth isn't there for this position grouping as a whole, and I think there is a lot of questions around what kind of starter Spencer Brown is going to be going into year 3 for him. So we'll see what happens, but that's why it is my number 2 position grouping. Appreciate that. Why says hit that like button, guys. Yes, guys and girls, everybody who's here, I've said it before. Sorry to say it again, but if you are enjoying this episode, this content, please, and thank you. Drop a like on this video, whether you're watching live now or listening later. If you are here on YouTube, please, and thank you. Drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way. It's greatly appreciated by myself and the entire team, please. Now, let's move on to the third most important roster need for the Bills. Actually, before I do that, real quick, I'm going to plug the sponsor. One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Online menu can be found in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms. Sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese, a great cheese to sauce ratio. One of my favorite things that they do, like say you get like peppers and onions and pepperoni, they dice up all the peppers and onions and then sprinkle it and distribute it evenly amongst the pizza so every bite has an even amount of all the toppings. It's not just like whole bits thrown everywhere. So it's like not even with every bite. They're just really great at pizza and blue cheese. And also, they're good people doing a lot of good for the community. They partner with Roswell, they partner with the SPCA, the Alzheimer's Foundation, Toys for Tots. They do a lot of good for the city and the community, and they make the best pizza in Buffalo. Go and get yourself some One Pie Pizza. My number 3 need for the Buffalo Bills roster, and I think this one is a bit contentious at times for people. I group them together because I think they're somewhat equal, and I go back and forth on which one is more important. But defensive line, defensive tackle, and edge are tremendously important for this Buffalo Bills team. Now, I want to start with one piece here. I know a lot of people are on this whole train and this wagon of go all offense. You don't need defense. The Eagles' defense was really good, and they lost to the Chiefs, and their defense didn't matter. So that means defense doesn't matter. Draft all offense. I disagree with that. Defense most definitely matters. You can't have no semblance. You can't have any semblance of defense and be a glass cannon of a team forced to score 40 points a week to win. Granted, it can happen, but it's not necessarily sustainable. If you look in 2022, the final 4 teams in the NFL, the Chiefs, the Bengals, the 49ers, the Eagles, all of them finished in the top 17 of the league in defensive DVOA. So basically the top half of the league, and all finished in the top 14 from weeks 11 through 18. And if you look again at their individual rankings for the entire season, the Niners were first in defensive DVOA, the Eagles were 7th, the Bengals were 11th. So 3 of the final 4 teams basically had top 10 defenses in terms of DVOA. 2021, weeks 11 through 18, again, down the stretch, all final 4 teams, the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Niners, the Rams, all finished in the top 19 of defensive DOA. But 3 of them, again, were in the top 11 down the stretch. The Rams were 4th, the Niners were 8th, and the Bengals were 11th. And then the Rams went on to win the Super Bowl, led by their defense, in a game that their defense carried them once Odell Beckham went down. Unless you have a tremendous outlier of an offense like Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, or the Derrick Henry Titans offense from a couple years ago that went to the AFC Championship, odds are you're going to need defensive firepower to some degree. The key with any team is the flexibility and variability that they can play to. The ability to, this is something that I'm bringing back from last offseason, and I say all the time, regular watchers and listeners of the show, you know what's up. The ability to play rock, paper, scissors, and to be able to throw all 3. If you're playing rock, paper, scissors, and you can only throw rock and paper, your odds go significantly down versus if you can throw rock, paper, and scissors. If you can throw all 3, you need to be able to mix and match based on what your opponent is throwing. Now, everybody keeps comparing the Bills to Bills fans keep comparing the Bills to the Chiefs. And again, I think a lot of this conversation is, well, look how the Chiefs just won the Super Bowl, just go in everything on offense, yada, yada. Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid can throw all 3 when they play rock, paper, scissors. They can throw rock, they can throw paper, and they can throw scissors. And they can also throw lava, which wins every time. They're an outlier. Outliers are outliers for a reason, because they are not the norm, which makes them hard to replicate. So don't use that example of, well, look what the Chiefs did. Just do what the Chiefs did. The Bills don't have Patrick Mahomes. The Bills don't have Andy Reid. The Bills don't have that combination. The Bills don't have that offensive line that the Chiefs have, right? The Bills don't have a chess piece like Travis Kelce, where I still think today, like a dominant tight end like that, a versatile tight end, is still one of the best chess pieces in football because of what it allows you to do. So I wanted to preface this ranking with that. You still need defense. Now, another argument that I've been hearing is that the Bills shouldn't invest in the defensive line anymore because their previous investments under this current regime haven't panned out, and therefore that means they should invest elsewhere. And I understand that line of thinking. I understand the semblance of that notion, but again, I don't agree with it. Previous failure in an area is not necessarily indicative of future failure. Striking out in several plate appearances doesn't mean you're going to strike out in every future plate appearance. You have to continue to swing. There's far too many variables that exist in player scouting, development, and performance to make a concrete decision about a position grouping to stop addressing a position grouping. From the front office to the coaches to the players themselves, there is a multitude of variables and reasons why players turn out to be what they are. Now, just because that you shouldn't stop swinging at the plate doesn't mean you shouldn't change your approach at the plate or work on your swing, but it definitely doesn't mean you shouldn't bother swinging the bat at all. That's the piece, right? I think the Bills are fine to change their approach at the plate or work on their swing, but they shouldn't stop swinging, even though they've taken swings at defensive line and have missed. And also, cutting yourself off from an entire position group isn't necessarily the smartest thing, especially one as critical as defensive line. Games are won and lost in the trenches, offensively, defensively. That proverbial, that adage, it's said so much and it's true. And especially with this year's draft class being strong on the defensive line, both in the interior and on the edge, and especially given the need for the Bills' defensive line for 2023 and beyond, you can't cut yourself off from this position grouping. And I like this comment here from Anthony. Anthony says Andy Reid and Mahomes is a cheat code. Yeah, they're literally lava in rock, paper, scissors. Like, and you can't win. Now, as I take a drink of water there and start to get into this point. Oh, Steven's saying the Bills' defensive tackle situation is really thin. That is true. We're going to start with defensive tackle. I'm not necessarily saying defensive tackle is more important than edge. Again, I went back and forth. Actually, I went back and forth with this position grouping as a whole. I considered making defensive tackle an edge need number 2 because of the volume of needs. I have it here as number 3, but to me, it's really like a 2A, 2B type of scenario with offensive tackle. If we just look at defensive tackle, like Steven mentioned a minute ago, the Bills' current defensive tackle depth chart is Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, Elianku, Brandon Bryant, Cortez Broughton, and Kendall Vickers. I'm going to read that again. The current Buffalo Bills defensive tackle depth chart is Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, Elianku, Brandon Bryant, Cortez Broughton, and Kendall Vickers. That is the Bills' defensive tackle grouping for 2023. And the players from that grouping who are signed past 2023 is none. The Bills have no defensive tackle signed past this season. So even if all the guys for 2023 were studs, they have no one past this season, which is a little scary. But let's focus on 2023. Right now, for a team that relies on their defensive line to fit the run, generate pressure, penetrate gaps, and win, this interior defensive line group is underwhelming. I mentioned it earlier. If you didn't know how important Daquan Jones was to this Buffalo Bills defense, you knew after the Cincinnati Bengals playoff game. We saw the impact that he had. Ed Oliver, I don't think he's as bad as everyone's making him out to be. But, granted, he hasn't been worth the top 10 pick that the Bills used to get him. But at the end of the day, he gets canceled out far too much as a starter. You have stretches and games and series where you don't even know he's out there and you can't have that kind of impact. So he's one of your starters. It's him and Daquan Jones. So you've got Daquan Jones, who again, I'm a big fan of. I love the game that he adds and the dynamic that he brings to the Bills defense. Your other main starter is Ed Oliver, who is super mercurial in play. Tim Settle is your number 3. Tim Settle is your defensive tackle 3 right now. He had some of the worst advanced metrics for defensive tackles all of last year, and he disappeared a ton on tape. Granted, he was banged up a bit, but he's your defensive tackle 3 right now. Everyone after him is literally a huge question mark. Elianku, Brandon Bryant, Cortez Broughton, and Kendall Vickers. All those guys are question marks. And to top it off, again, you literally have no defensive tackle signed past this season. This group needs to get better in and of itself, knowing how important the defensive line is to the Buffalo Bills. But this also ties into the linebacker position, which is part of the reason that makes me think this is a sneaky number 2 kind of need, because whether it's a rookie that comes in and starts at linebacker or Terrell Bernard or Babylon Spector, keeping linebackers clean is imperative in this defense, whether that means occupying offensive linemen or penetrating and causing havoc or winning one-on-ones. The defensive tackles and the edges impact your second and third levels on defense. And like I've said a bunch on Twitter, like I've said a bunch on this show, how you fit the run determines what coverages you can play on the back end. If you have to walk a safety down pre-snap or post-snap, that limits the post-snap coverages you can play, and it limits the pre-snap disguising that you can do. At defensive tackle right now, there are significant questions in the top 4 on the depth chart. Again, the top 4 right now are Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, and Ilianku or Brandon Bryant, depending on how you're putting it for. Those are your top 4, 5-ish defensive tackles right now. And then as you go down the list further, there's even more questions because you genuinely have no idea what you're getting. See the question here from Les saying, is Jordan Phillips coming back? I hope so. I like what he brought last year when he was healthy. But here's the piece with that as well. Even if you bring back Jordan Phillips, who again I liked, man, like you still have to hedge your bets to a degree because at this point, his injury track record is continuing to rear its ugly head. He was hurt a ton in Arizona. It's part of the reason why he didn't last there. He comes to Buffalo this past year, again, when healthy, very solid, perfect as that defensive tackle 3 or defensive tackle 4, depending on how you looked at him. But he gets hurt again, and he gets significantly hurt. And, also kudos to Jordan Phillips. I don't know if we've talked about it enough. Like, the dude literally played with one shoulder down the stretch. Like, he was in there literally playing with one arm, gutting it out, trying to make plays. But I think that also spoke to the depth on the interior. They had to put a guy out there who couldn't use one of his arms on the defensive line. His effectiveness was severely limited, and they felt that putting a one-armed Jordan Phillips was better than any of the options they had on the interior. That also speaks to where this interior defense is from a quality standpoint. Settle was banged up early in the year, and I believe at the end, it's just not a great situation. The functional depth on this defensive interior, which started out well, did not last as the season went on. And then once Von Miller went down, we saw the impact it had on the interior, but we also saw the impact that it had on the edge grouping. That's the next piece I want to talk about here. Your edge grouping right now, for the 2023 Buffalo Bills. The edges the Buffalo Bills have are Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, and Kingsley Jonathan. That's it. Von Miller, to me, he's going to miss time this year. I've said it a couple times on the show. I think a timeline that seems fair is him returning sometime between the middle of October and the middle of November. For me, that's a safe bet. I don't want to rush him back. You want him for that stretch run. You want him in December and January and hopefully February, fingers crossed, which means your top 3 edges for the beginning part of the season, for the first month, maybe month and a half, maybe 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, your top 3 edges right now are Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, and Boogie Basham. And even if Von Miller was good to go to start the year, Boogie Basham has still largely been ineffective. Even as the number 4 edge rusher, considering how much the Bills rotate here, his production hasn't been up to snuff. AJ Epinesa has been far better than Boogie Basham for me, but still isn't a proven winner on the edge. Neither are guys that can get you a bucket or offer a consistent plus matchup potential. So even them as edge 3 and edge 4 isn't ideal if Von's your 1 and Groot's your 2, but it's even worse if they're edge 2 and edge 3 respectively if Von Miller misses time. Again, we saw the impact with Von Miller being out and what it had on the defensive line as a whole, not just the edges, but on the interior and on coverages too. You need more pop from the edge grouping. And this ties me into another point that I've spoken about on the show, but I'm going to address it here again. I don't like the archetype the Bills have at edge. The Bills have largely gone for pocket compressing, bigger, I don't want to say non-athletic, but they don't skew towards bendy, athletic guys who get around the arc, move type guys. They want big, they want long, they want guys who can go through the chest of a tackle and compress the pocket. They don't want guys who go around. They don't want moves. They want guys who can just squeeze and narrow that pocket on the edge. I don't think that's necessarily worked. And given their notion and their idea is with these quarterbacks that can create off script, if you can compress the pocket around them, you hem that quarterback in. My contention now at this point is those quarterbacks that can escape the pocket, like Patrick Mahomes, those quarterbacks can do that regardless of how you compress the pocket. So I would like to fight fire with fire a little bit and start to get more bendy, athletic move type of edge rushers on this team. Von Miller is very much the antithesis of every type of edge rusher they have gone for under this regime. So the question is Von Miller just an outlier because he's Von Miller and it's like, well, whatever, we'll bring him in. We don't care what his archetype is. Or is it them potentially maybe moving towards that type of archetype, a little more bendy, a little more athletic, a little more bursty on the edge? If you look at 2024, the only edges under contract in 2024 are Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, and Boogie. That's it. Again, that's it. So even if all three were studs, you would still need depth going into 2024. And all three aren't studs, so you need that even more. I mentioned, again, the numbers when Von Miller went down. The Bills pass rush, the differences. So again, Von Miller went down in week 12. So the Bills pass rush in weeks 1 through 11 versus weeks 12 through 18 when Von Miller was gone. They went from 7th in pressures to 22nd in pressures. They went from 12th in combined sacks to 25th in combined sacks. They went from 11th in pressure percentage to 19th in pressure percentage. They went from a 15% blitz rate to a 24% blitz rate. They went from 69% of the time showing two high safeties pre-snap to showing two high safeties pre-snap 52% of the time. A 17 percentage point drop. They went from 5th in two high shells to 16th. They went from 3rd in rushing DVOA to 9th in rushing DVOA. They went from 7th in passing DVOA to 10th in passing DVOA. When you look at individual numbers, if you're looking at pass rush productivity, that's something I really like to look towards. It's a PFF metric. Again, it's different from a grade, but PFF's pass rushing productivity is a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times a player rushed the passer. So again, if Timmy had 100 pressures and Joe only had 10, but Joe only rushed the passer 6 times and Timmy rushed the passer 600, it kind of puts things on a bit of a more even playing field. So defensive line PRP, when you look at Bills qualifying defensive linemen. So weeks 12 through 18, there were 213 qualifying defensive linemen from weeks 12 through 18. Again, that's when Von Miller was out. The Bills players, pass rush productivity in terms of rank, weeks 12 through 18, Greg Rousseau was 22nd out of 213. Very respectable, solid. AJ Epinesa was 29th. So you had 2 Bills edges in the top 30. One was Groot, one was Epinesa. I don't think people realized how much AJ Epinesa improved and played better down the stretch. Still not ideal. I still think he's best suited as a 3 or a 4, but really solid pass rush productivity from AJ Epinesa in weeks 12 through 18 without Von Miller, finishing 29th. But then you look at the rest, again, 213 qualifying defensive linemen for pass rush productivity. Groot was 22nd. AJ Epinesa was 29th. Daquan Jones was 102nd. Shaq Lawson was 122nd. Jordan Phillips was also 122nd. Ed Oliver was tied for 140th. Boogie Basham was 179th. And Tim Settle was tied for 192nd. You started to see some of those warts when Von Miller went down. You started to see some things bubble up and come to the surface and get exposed under the light a little bit when Von Miller went down. Now, yes, this also coincided with some other injuries that this Bills defensive line had. And some of those guys, again, from a pass rush standpoint, like Daquan Jones being 102nd, he's not brought in to be a pass rusher. So I'm not looking at that and being like terrible numbers for him. But Ed Oliver being 140th out of 213 qualifying defensive linemen in pass rush productivity, that ain't cutting it. Von Miller goes down. You need everybody to step up. Greg Rousseau finishes in the top 22 for a dude who was banged up a little bit with an ankle. That's a win for me. AJ Epinesa finishes 29th. I think he stepped up his game. But Ed Oliver finishes 140th. You need guys to step up to mitigate the loss of a true playmaker and stud like Von Miller. And you did not get that from Ed Oliver, Boogie Basham, and Tim Settle. And I know Settle was banged up a little bit, and even Oliver. There's all these variables. But at the end of the day, this defensive line did not get it done on the interior or on the edge when Von Miller was gone. And if you look at what their grouping is for 2023, on the interior and on the outside, you don't have enough players that, I'm going to continue to use this phrase, that can get you a bucket. Basketball terminology. You don't have guys who clear out, let me go one-on-one with this dude. I can beat this guy. That's what you have in Von Miller. And I think Greg Rousseau is sneakily starting to get there a little bit. Greg Rousseau has some bucket to his game. He's starting to become a guy. He was already that guy against the run, but he's starting to become that guy a little more with the pass where he can take advantage of a matchup. He can get you a win. He can make a play. He's starting to get there. I'm excited to see what his year 3 looks like because I think there was a significant jump in his game from year 1 to year 2. And hopefully we can see that again from year 2 to year 3. But AJ Epinesa creeped up a little bit towards the end. I know he had a ton of missed tackles and people rag on him for the missed tackles, but he cleaned that up towards the end of the year. I think there's still some hope for him. I'm interested to see what his year 4 looks like for the Bills in 2023. But then again, that ties into the next point. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2024. Are you bringing him back? What kind of deal are you bringing him back on? Boogie Basham is going to go into his year 4 in 2024. Do you want him being your number 3 edge rusher? Do you even want him being your number 4? Like, where's your head at with that? Ed Oliver is in that 5th-year option as an unrestricted free agent next year. Are you bringing back Ed Oliver? Tim Settle, unrestricted free agent. Again, next year, there are no defensive tackles under contract, and the only 3 edges that are under contract are Von Miller, Groot, and Boogie Basham. That's all you have on the defensive line. I think maybe Kingsley Jonathan, but who I like, but super improvement and not a good sample size. Defensive line is super important. The trenches are super important for everyone, but especially for a Sean McDermott Bills defense that likes to rotate and needs to rotate given the responsibility of that defensive line. And it's not just for the sake of rushing the passer and generating pressure. It's also in the run game and how you fit the run and how you keep the linebackers clean. And can you impact the run game to the point that your safeties can play back and you can disguise coverage and you can change things pre to post snap and you can run anything you want on the back end because you can't if you can't fit the run. And where your run fits start is with the defensive line. Your linebackers like Matt Milano being able to flow freely and being athletic, some of that is him being a good player and being instinctual and being aggressive and being athletic and agile. But a lot of it is your defensive line keeping those linebackers clear. Fred Warner is a tremendous linebacker in and of himself. He also benefits from having a group of velociraptors up front that keep him clean and allow him to penetrate and allow him to shoot gaps. The defensive line is so important to everything that the Buffalo Bills do defensively. And their grouping as a whole right now on the interior and on the edge, especially if Von Miller misses time, which I think he does, it's not good enough right now for 2023. Even when Von comes back, that's still a lot to put on his shoulders. You need more proven productivity and proven one-on-one winning ability. You need like a Leonard Floyd to bring in, even if it's on a 1-year, $8 or $9 million deal, bring in somebody like that who is proven, who can be a legitimate 2 or 1A or 1B, however you're looking at it, to Greg Rousseau, who can be a legitimate 2 to Von Miller or a number 3 with Rousseau and Von, and you can keep up that rotation. You need some sort of proven productivity. I'm also okay with edge being addressed, or defensive tackle, honestly, being addressed in round 1 or round 2. I don't think it happens, but I'm okay with one of those picks in the first 3 rounds, so on the first 2 days, being on the interior or on the edge. I think you need, again, it's frustrating and I know it's annoying because they've signed so many edge players and interior defenders and they've drafted so many and so on and so forth. I know it's annoying to be having this conversation for another offseason again, but that doesn't mean this isn't a position of need in general for any team, but especially for the Buffalo Bills. I would not be shocked if the Bills used a defensive line pick, either whether on the interior or on the edge, in one of the first 3 rounds in this draft. And honestly, there's a lot of really good talent. I like BJ Ojolari, the edge from LSU. I like Felix Anudike-Uzomah, the edge from Kansas State. Those are some guys who I think would be there at 27, maybe available at pick 59. You've got a lot of defensive tackle depth. You've got Keanu Benton. You've got Kalijah Cansey, who I know is a little too like with Ed Oliver for some Bills fans. You've got Mozzie Smith. You've got Siaki Ika from Baylor. You've got some smaller guys. You've got Romo from Texas. You've got Kobe Turner from Wake Forest, who I really like. The Bills need reinforcements for 2023, but especially beyond. They have almost nobody signed for 2024 and beyond. And that's just, again, on top of the need for 2023. So that's a huge one for me. Again, it's number 3, defensive tackle and edge, but for me, it's really like kind of 2A, 2B with offensive tackle because it's not just for what they are in a vacuum for the individual defensive line pieces. It's how they affect the entire rest of the defense. And if you're bringing in a rookie linebacker, right? Or you're starting Terrell Bernard. Either way, you're going to be starting a linebacker that doesn't have a ton of experience. You know what would really help him? A defensive line that keeps him clean, or a defensive line that gets penetration and causes havoc and allows him to play off of it and make plays. So it's not just about an individual player winning and generating pass rush, which is what they do need, but it's also about the positive or negative potential domino effect that position grouping has on the entire rest of the unit. So interior defensive line and edge, again, I don't know if it's because people are so offensive minded focused this offseason or just don't want to think about defensive line anymore. This is a bigger need than people realize. And it's not great from what they have currently on the depth chart for 2023, but even more so 2024 and beyond. Now, this last one I'm going to bring up, I grouped it together again. We got wide receiver, tight end, and running back. Now, the reason I grouped all of these together is I somewhat see them as being in a similar state. I think each of these groups has a fine floor plus ceiling relative to the positions we've already listed, but I think they all could also get better. We'll start with wide receiver. I like the auxiliary pieces that they added. I like Deontay Hardy. I like Trent Sherfield. And then the combination of all of it, so Hardy plus Sherfield plus Diggs plus Davis plus Khalil Shakir, I think you have enough skill set diversity and athleticism to be fine. But again, you could also do better here, right? You could stand to see a receiver with legitimate wide receiver 2 potential like a Jordan Addison, or what looks to be a premier potential slot receiver in Jackson Smith and Jigba, or someone who's got slot and Z wide receiver potential like Zay Flowers. Depending on how you view Khalil Shakir, I'm going to continue to say this. If the Bills view him as a slot guy, I think you look more towards the boundary in the draft. If they view Shakir as more of a boundary guy or inside outside, maybe they look towards more of a slot guy in the draft. Shakir's snaps between inside and outside were almost 50-50, even split last year. So we'll see what they truly consider him as. If we're talking wide receiver in round 1, the only receivers I'm taking in round 1 are Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, or Zay Flowers. I really, really, really like Josh Downs from North Carolina. He's somebody I liked all during the college football season, and I liked more on tape. But because he's pretty much pure slot, even though he does play bigger than, his smaller frame and smaller size, I don't know if I want to take him in round 1, especially given what they've done already at wide receiver. I would love Josh Downs at 59 or in round 2. I like Josh Downs a lot. I would even consider him given the need potentially in round 1, but I think there's going to be better value at other positions. And again, I think that's representative of this wide receiver group. Like, they're fine as an entire unit. Again, skill set diversity, give you a high enough floor and ceiling combination to be fine and be comfortable, but you could do better. You could have a better slot receiver. You could do better with a potential wide receiver 2 that isn't Gabriel Davis, depending on what happens with his career. Sherfield has never really seen significant snaps. Hardy has had injury concerns, so you don't know how healthy he's going to be. So if he drops down or he gets banged up, you're relying more on Sherfield. Is that what you want? You're relying more on Shakir. What role does he play? So on and so forth. There's a lot of different pieces, I think, that have to align and connect. But again, I think this wide receiver grouping is fine. If they don't do anything to the wide receivers, I won't be distraught, but I also think they could upgrade. And I think that conversation happens in conjunction with tight end and running back, which we're also going to talk about. Oh, come here from Chris. Hey, Chris, I appreciate you being here. Chris says, Ant, do you like Bryce Ford Wheaton? Ooh, from West Virginia. He's somebody who continues to show up on mock drafts for me. He is in the next grouping of wide receivers that I'm taking a peek at. I'm looking at Bryce Ford Wheaton. I need to look at dude from Fresno State, Moreno Cooper. There's that next group of wide receivers in that tier who I have to get to. I remember Bryce Ford Wheaton balling out during the regular season when I was watching him on games. Size, speed, could go up and high point the football and moss some dudes and make some plays downfield. But I want to see the actual game tape and see what's up. So off of broadcast and watching him during the year, yes, I do like Bryce Ford Wheaton, but I need to see the tape because the tape doesn't lie and the tape tells everything. And I don't think broadcast is enough to truly judge a wide receiver. But good question. I like that, Chris. Again, wide receiver, I'm fine with it, but I think they could do with an upgrade or two. Same with running back, right? I am fine with Cook and Harris and Hines, but you could also get better. Same thing with tight end. I'm fine with Dawson Knox and Quentin Morris, but you could do better. All three of these position groups for me all represent positions that I would like to address in the draft in some way. Running back isn't a necessity, but there are certain guys who I like on day 3, like if Muhammad Ibrahim from Minnesota was there. I think he's like a real true hammer, and I love his style, and I love what he did at Minnesota. I'd like to add a guy like him. But again, if they don't add anybody, that's fine. Again, these position groups all represent positions that I'd like to address in the draft in some way. And I would spend a day 1 or a day 2 pick on one of these positions if the right player was available. But I don't think the needs at any of these 3 positions trumps linebacker, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, or edge. So again, for wide receiver, if Jackson Smith and Jigba or Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers fell to 27, I'm cool with that if the Bills were to take one. If Bijan Robinson fell to 27, I would be fine with that. If Jahmyr Gibbs or Charbonnet fell to 59 or in the 3rd round, Gibbs won't fall to the 3rd round. Gibbs should probably go in the 1st round, or he'll probably go early 2nd. Even though I don't love spending another day 2 pick on a running back, I would be okay with one of them in round 2 or round 3. If one of them fell significantly, I'd be cool. I don't love it, but I'd be okay. For tight end, if Sam Laporta was available at 59, tight end from Iowa, he's my tight end too. I know he isn't necessarily tight end 2 on the board. I know a lot of people are in love with Mayer from Notre Dame, Dalton Kincaid from Utah. You've got Musgrave from Oregon State. There's a lot of names that are kind of moving up. I don't think Laporta is going to be available at 59. If he was, I would jump all over him at 59. Part of it is I've just been enamored with the idea of 12 personnel and what you can do with it. And Sam Laporta is a true dual threat tight end in the mold of, I don't want to just say George Kittle because he went to Iowa and so does Laporta, and that's an unfair comp, so on and so forth. But you've got a tight end who can legitimately function in line as a blocker, or can line up in the slot, can line up as an H-back, can line up out wide as an X or a Z. He's quick, he's fast, he's athletic, he's good after the catch, he's physical, he's nasty. I think he opens up so much for your offense. And if you're running 12 personnel and you've got Diggs and Davis and Laporta and Knox and James Cook, you run the ball on a play and then you go no huddle and you spread it out and you're going 5 wide. Or you're just going with, a 2x2 shotgun formation with Cook in the backfield and your slots are Laporta and Knox, or you put one of them out wide and Diggs is in the slot. There's so many cool potential opportunities with 12 personnel. So again, that's not a huge need. I like Quentin Morris. I think I like Quentin Morris more than most. So I'm fine if it's him and Dawson Knox. But could they do better? Yes. Do they need to do better? Not necessarily, given where the other roster needs already exist. Amicus says Mayer at 27. I don't think he's going to last at 27. I think given what he can do in the pass game, how reliable he is as a route runner with his size, his hands, his ability to high point the football, and then what he does as a blocker, I don't think he lasts until 27. I think he goes in the top 25, which, I think is fair given his skill set. You might see a good run on tight ends. Like Kincaid might go in the top 20. Mayer might go in the top 20. But there's a lot of smoke being spread around now too. Hendon Hooker is being talked about, a quarterback from Tennessee in terms of going in the 1st round, which is wild now. But Mayer, I definitely don't think lasts until 27. Richard says, where's Washington at? So he's talking about Darnell Washington, tight end from Georgia. I think it depends on what you're looking at him for. Is he going to be your tight end one? Is he going to be a tight end two? Are you a run heavy offense? What do you think of him as a receiver? Are you cool with him just being a blocking guy and a red zone threat and somewhat of an athlete? I think that depends on the offense and the fit. I think he's a really intriguing prospect. He blocks like a sixth offensive lineman, and then he's an absolute monster to defend. He takes a while to get going because he is a long-legged dude and he's huge, but he's athletic for his size, and I think he's a true red zone threat. You just put a dude up one-on-one in the end zone, you're just throwing go balls to him. Like, who's covering Darnell Washington in the end zone after he's mauling guys in the run over and over and over again? Chris says, is Zay Flowers a first round grade though, or a second round grade that will go in the first round? The second one, a second round grade that will go in the first round. And I don't think that's necessarily disrespectful to Zay Flowers. In most drafts, you really only have 15 to 20 first round grade guys. Usually the guys in the back end of the first half, or the back end of the first round, are usually graded with a second round type of grade. I'm also a bit lower on this wide receiver class than some might be. I think there's a lot of redundancy in terms of skill set and fit. A lot of these guys are, slots or Z receivers only. So I think there's, some trade-off ability. Do you spend a pick early on for a receiver when you can get a guy with a similar skill set in round 2 or 3 or even potentially 4? I do like Zay Flowers, though. I like his combination of inside-outside ability, his run after catch, his explosiveness, his ability to really get chunks in the intermediate and vertically down the field. I think he needs a little more polish in terms of what he does underneath from a route tree perspective and a route distribution perspective. So, man, we'll see what happens with Zay Flowers. Ooh, so Chris says, so give me a first round grade at 27 over Flowers, even if it's Bijan, but hopefully if it's an offensive tackle. That's where the value comes in too, right? Like, if you have a first round grade on a guy, I think that's what the Bills had with Kyer Elam last year. I think Brandon Bead said Kyer Elam was the last guy still on the board that they had a first round grade on. And then that combined with them wanting a corner is the reason they took him. But again, that's where the value comes in. Do you take, again, going back to a conversation we had earlier, Darnell Wright, if he's there at 27 and you have a first round grade on him, do you take him over Jack Campbell, who you have a second round grade on, but the need for linebacker is greater than the need for offensive tackle potentially? Like, how do you do that dance, and how do you weigh value versus opportunity cost and resource allocation? That's where it comes down to. Pete says, what percentage of plays would we use 12 personnel for it to be worth that investment? Not much. What tight end was a huge impact in year 1? Not many. But see, that's part of my point. I would turn up the dial on 12 personnel. I think 12 personnel is an ultimate dictator to defenses in today's NFL. NFL defenses that are built to stop the pass and built to stop zone run schemes. If you can run the ball down their throat with some sort of at-you style runs and then keep them off balance with no huddle and mix in different types of sets and alignments with the exact same personnel. Like, if you have, again, say they had Sam Laporta, it's Diggs, Davis, Knox, Laporta, James Cook. You can be in traditional, like a pro personnel formation. You could have Knox attached to the line of scrimmage and Laporta hipped off of him, or vice versa. And you can run inside zone or outside zone or mid zone or whatever you want. You could get a gain of 4 or 5. And then you could go in no huddle and be in a 2x2 shotgun where it's Diggs and Laporta and Davis and Knox, or flip anybody outside and put Knox and Diggs and Davis inside, or go 5 wide and put Cook out wide or Cook in the slot. And you're doing all of that. Defenses have to match it. They have to match your personnel. So they're sitting there and they're going, okay, they're in 12. Okay, we're going to match and go nickel. Okay, cool. You're going to go nickel? Okay, well, guess what? We're going to run the ball down your throat, because now we've got one of our tight ends on your nickel defender, and that's probably an advantage for us given Knox and Laporta's physicality and their ability in the run game. Oh, now you're getting gouged in the run a little bit? Okay, cool. Now we got to bring in a third linebacker. Oh, okay, cool. You brought in a third linebacker. Now we're going to go spread. And now we're going to make that third linebacker, who probably isn't a regular starter and probably isn't as good of a cover guy, we're going to make him function in space against Laporta or Knox. Or we're going to put Diggs in the slot and make that linebacker have to cover Diggs. Or if not, and that linebacker goes outside, out wide to the boundary with one of those tight ends, maybe that's a man indicator. And even if it's not, you got a guy who maybe isn't ideal for coverage, who probably isn't a regular starter, out on an island in a position that he's not normally covering or maybe necessarily comfortable with. I think it's an ultimate chess piece. So I know they haven't used a ton of 12 in the past. I would turn up that dial on 12. Part of it is tied to just my football philosophy and what I like to do from a schematic perspective. Also, I think you could point to what the Kansas City Chiefs did with their tight end personnel packages in order to kind of see what you can do as far as mismatches and in terms of what you can do. And again, dictating the defense is really kind of turning their personnel groupings and weaponizing against them. So we'll see. I think that's a fair point on the back end, though. What tight end was a huge impact in year one? It's tough. But again, if you're drafting Sam Laporta and he's your tight end 2 and he's your 3rd or 4th option, I think the learning curve is different. Like, I think what he offers you isn't necessarily about his individual production. It's tied to the schematic benefit that his introduction to the offense allows you. That's kind of what my thought is with that. I also think you can make the case that, from a receiving perspective, there's several tight ends in this class that might be a better 3rd receiving option than some of the receivers that are available in this class. But that is a conversation for another time. We have got to get out of here now. This has been I didn't know how long this episode was going to go. I should have known that would go decently long because it's Disguise coverage and we love live chat engagement here on the show. I want to thank everyone who joined me for this episode of Disguise coverage, whether you were here in the live chat, watching later, whatever have you. Thank you very much for your listen, your download, your view, whatever have you. To all the folks in the live chat, thank you very much for being with me here on this episode. Like I said earlier, it's always awesome to see all the live viewers come in and see the engagement, to constantly see all the comments in the chat and the engagement with each other, the engagement with myself, the back and forth, the questions, the thoughts, the comments, the concerns, the beliefs, the takes, the reasonings, anything and everything for each other and for myself. So thank you very much for joining me, everybody who rode with me live on this episode. If you didn't ride with me live on this episode, again, and you're watching later or listening later on any one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool too. Thank you very much for your post-live view, download, listen, whatever form or fashion your support comes in. It is greatly appreciated. If you are listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcast, please leave a rating. Please leave a review if you'd be so kind, especially if it's genuine. If you have real feedback, positive or negative, it's extremely appreciated by myself. So please leave a rating and a review if you care to and if you'd be so kind. Again, if you're here on YouTube now live or watching later here on YouTube, please, and thank you. Drop a like on this video. It goes a long way towards helping myself and the entire channel to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about Disguise coverage, about how awesome this show is. Word of mouth is always extremely helpful for these types of things. So please tell your family and friends and loved ones about this show. If you hated this show, tell your enemies and try and ruin their day with this show. I appreciate all the kind words coming in from myself. Thank you very much. I don't like to pull up too many positive comments or really any because I feel corny and weird doing it. And I already feel corny because I'm asking for likes. So thank you very much for all the kind words coming in. I definitely notice them and they sincerely mean a lot to me. I almost forgot. Chris saying, and I'm here to remind you to plug the Cover One Hockey Watch Party on Friday at 7. I will be there. Myself, Chris Kepner, and also Adam Stencil from Cover One. We've been doing these Sabres watch parties pretty much every week. So the Sabres are still alive and kicking, although they are very frustrating to watch. But join us on the Cover One playback channel, which we will be communicating on Chris's Twitter, my Twitter, the Cover One Twitter. You'll find the link with all the again, literally the links for you to sign up. And we basically all just watch the Sabres game together. And so when it's happy, we all get to watch together and talk to one another and comment and go back and forth. We'll be live up on the stage. We can bring people from the chat up on camera live on stage, or you can just sit in the chat. But at the end of the day, it's just an awesome environment to watch the Sabres together. And whether good or bad, it's a great time. And even when it's bad, we find a way to make it good and enjoyable. So join us Friday for the Sabres Cover One Hockey Watch Party. Friday at 7 p.m. as they take on the New York Rangers. That's going to do it for me on this episode. I appreciate you, Walter. Nice comment. Thank you very much again to everybody who joined me live, later, whatever have you. I appreciate the hell out of you. We're almost into April, which means draft miss is right around the corner. It's an exciting time. Anybody who had any questions, thoughts, or concerns or comments, and I didn't get to them on the show, I apologize. Add me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro two underscores ANT. Message me on Twitter, DM me on Twitter, whatever have you. I'll get back to you definitely on there. That is my MO in terms of communication. Again, if you haven't already, please, 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 and thank you. Drop a like on this video. I appreciate the hell out of you folks more than you will possibly know. Thank you to everyone. I will see you next week, next Tuesday, for another episode of Disguise Coverage live here on the Cover One channel at 9 p.m. Eastern next Tuesday. That's going to do it for us here on this episode. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones all do well. Take care of one another. Be kind to one another. Stay safe. Thank you for all the engagement, the questions and the thoughts and the back and forth. Godspeed. I'll see you next week. And as always,